Get her out of the house. Tonight. The land and the ranch are ours. That was the message my son sent to his wife. Only he didn't. He sent it to the entire family group chat, and before he could delete it, half the cousins had already seen it. I had already seen it, and in that moment, everything inside me cracked wide open. Not because of what he said, but because deep down, I already knew it was true. I'm so glad you're here. If you're listening to this, please like and subscribe to my channel, and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. Because this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about how far some people will go to erase you from the life you built, and how you fight back when they do. That morning had started like any other. I fed the chickens, watered the tomatoes along the side fence, and stood on the porch drinking my coffee just as the fog rolled back from the far pasture. 68 years old, and I could still carry a feed bag across the barnyard if I had to. Still ran my little ranch the way I always had, alone and quietly. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Then came that message. He unsent it almost immediately, but the damage was done. My hands were still damp from the sink when I opened the thread. First, I froze. Then I read it again. I felt my knees start to weaken, my spine sink, like the floor was tilting under me. The group went silent. No apologies, no follow-up, just a cold, eerie nothing. And from my son, the one I raised alone after his father died in a tractor accident when he was 9, still nothing, not even a call. I stepped outside because the walls felt too tight, my breath short. The oak trees in the front pasture swayed gently like they didn't know the world had just changed. I looked at the fence posts I had mended with my own hands, the barn doors I had painted last fall. I remembered when I signed the deed in my name, not ours, not his. And yet he said ours, plural, with confidence, like it already belonged to him, like I was a problem to be solved. I didn't cry, not then, not even when the silence stretched into hours, and not one person from that family thread reached out to ask if I was okay. What I did instead was walk through every room of my house, slow and deliberate, and I started noticing things I had ignored. The spare bedroom no longer had my quilts. They had been replaced by his wife's grey fleece throws. The pantry had snacks I didn't eat, protein powders, little sticky notes with her handwriting. In the bathroom, my shampoo had been pushed aside for hers. In the garage, boxes with their names on it, stacked high like they were moving in, like they were taking over, and maybe they already had. He and his wife had come to stay a while 3 months ago while their kitchen was under renovation. That was the excuse. Temporary. Just a few weeks, they said. But the weeks turned into months, and slowly I had felt myself being edged out of my own life. At first it was subtle. She rearranged my spices. He moved my recliner to make space for their couch. She told me the internet was too slow, so they changed the plan and put it in her name. And I let it happen. I let it happen because I thought maybe it was just young people being careless. I told myself they were family, that they wouldn't mean any harm. But now I knew better. Now I had it in writing. A single sentence that shattered every illusion I was still holding on to. A sentence not meant for me, but now burned into my memory forever. Get her out of the house. Tonight. And just like that, my home was no longer mine. But what they didn't know was I hadn't spent a lifetime surviving for nothing. And if they wanted a war over the land I built with my bare hands, then I was going to give them one. Not with fists, but with the kind of patience and fire only a betrayed mother can carry. And believe me, my next move would be one they would never see coming. The day after that message, I didn't get out of bed right away. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening for movement in the house. I heard footsteps, muffled conversation, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. My son and his wife, going about their morning like nothing had happened, like they hadn't just let the truth slip out into the open for the entire family to see. There was no apology waiting for me, no explanation, just the quiet hum of betrayal settling into the walls. I finally got up and made myself a pot of coffee, hands slow, movements automatic. At the kitchen table, I stared down at the chipped rim of my favorite mug. I had bought it years ago at a local fair with my late husband. He died before our son even hit high school. A tractor rollover out on the West Field. It had taken everything I had to hold the ranch together after that. I kept going for my boy. I worked double shifts, sold my wedding jewelry to cover his tuition when scholarships came up short. I remember patching the roof myself during a storm because there was no one else to do it. He used to call me tough as nails. I never imagined that same boy would one day be scheming to put me out. As I stood up to pour a second cup, I saw my daughter-in-law through the window. She was standing in the backyard, phone to her ear, pacing. Her tone was sharp, clipped. She wasn't looking at the garden I had built from nothing. She wasn't noticing the way the early sun lit up the dew on the pasture grass. She was focused on something else, someone else. That land didn't mean a thing to her. It was just space, a future sale, a number on a spreadsheet. Later that afternoon, I walked out to the barn. It used to be my sanctuary. I kept it clean, well organized. Now it was cluttered with their things. Boxes stacked along the walls, random furniture they never asked permission to store. They had taken over, slowly but steadily, one space at a time. My shelves of tools had been rearranged, labels removed. Some of my grandfather's old farming equipment was shoved behind paint buckets. I noticed something else that day. My name was no longer on the mailbox. They had taped over it with one of those sticky, pre-printed address labels. It had their names only. I stood there for a full minute, staring at that small rectangle of paper. It was something no one would notice unless they looked close. But it was deliberate, intentional. It was a message. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I didn't storm into the house or demand answers. I went back inside, pulled out my old ledger book, and started writing things down. Dates, changes, bank notices, conversations, anything that had shifted since they moved in, anything that felt off. I wasn't going to let this be a slow erasure. That night, they didn't come home until late. I heard the car doors slam, heard them laughing as they came through the back entrance. I stayed in bed, lights off. I listened as they talked downstairs. At one point, I heard my son say something that made my chest tighten. He said she was finally getting used to calling the place theirs, that she should start thinking about paint colors. They had already moved on. In their minds, I was already gone. But they had forgotten one thing. I wasn't raised to quit. I had built everything around me with sweat and bare hands, and if they thought I was going to fade quietly into the background, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. 3 days after the message, they threw a barbecue. Not a quiet dinner or something casual. A full gathering. Dozens of folding chairs in the yard, borrowed tables, coolers stacked high with beer, and music loud enough to echo across the fields. I wasn't asked if it was okay. I wasn't told. I found out because I saw a flyer on the counter that morning with a list of food assignments and names written in her handwriting. That afternoon, cars started pulling into the gravel drive. Family, neighbors, even people I hadn't seen in years. Some nodded at me as they passed by on the porch, others barely made eye contact. I stood near the kitchen, watching as trays of food were brought in, as my refrigerator was stuffed with things I hadn't bought. She had cleared a shelf in the pantry for their supplies. A younger cousin came in with her toddler, looked around, then asked my daughter-in-law where to put the diaper bag. She pointed toward my bedroom. I kept quiet. I smiled. I helped refill lemonade and made myself useful because that's what people like me do. I had never made scenes. I had kept my chin up through worse. But I knew something was coming. I could feel it in the way Daniel avoided my eyes. He was waiting, planning something. As the evening sun dipped low, the backyard filled up. People sat in clusters, laughing, eating, gossiping. Daniel stood near the grill, beer in hand, his voice louder than usual. At one point, someone asked if I still helped manage the land. He didn't even hesitate. He chuckled and said I had trouble remembering things lately, that he had to step in more and more because I was starting to forget even simple chores. The laughter that followed was light. Harmless, maybe, to someone who didn't know better, but it wasn't harmless to me. It was calculated. It was said just loud enough to stick. Someone clapped him on the shoulder and joked about how the older generation always thinks they're sharper than they are. He didn't correct them. Later, as I passed through the yard with a tray of cups, someone stopped me and asked if it was true I had burned dinner last week, that I had almost left the stove on overnight. I said no. I had cooked just fine. They looked at me the way people look at someone they're not sure they can trust, with that tight smile, that pity behind the eyes. By the time the cake came out, I had already slipped into the house. I stood at the sink and watched through the window as my son gave a toast. He said the future looked bright, that this land had raised him, and now it would raise his children. He didn't mention me once. Later, long after the guests had gone and the fire pit outside had gone cold, I sat alone in the dark living room. The house was quiet. My legs ached from standing all day. I stared at the photo above the mantel, a framed picture of Daniel at his high school graduation, me beside him, smiling with pride, one hand on his back. That version of him was gone. Around midnight, I went to the barn to check on the goats. I found the latch undone, feed buckets scattered, tools not where I left them. I cleaned up in silence. As I reached to hang the shovel, I heard the back door creak open. Daniel's voice called out behind me. He asked why I was still up. I told him I was checking on the animals. He stepped closer. His tone was flat. He said maybe I should start taking it easy. That stress wasn't good for people my age. I turned to face him, and in that dim barn light, I saw the shift in his face. Not concern, control. When I didn't answer, he smiled, a tight, rehearsed smile, and walked back to the house. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, because I was finally sure. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a phase. It was a takeover. And if I didn't stop it, I would disappear one room at a time until there was nothing left of me in this house but a name on a power bill, if they even left that much. The papers showed up on a Tuesday morning. They were left in a neat stack on the kitchen table, next to a mug of fresh coffee I hadn't brewed. I didn't touch them right away. I just stood there staring at the top page. A colourful folder, a pen placed carefully across the top, almost like a gift. At first glance, it looked harmless. Then I read the bold heading, Property Adjustment and Financial Agreement. My name was written underneath. I sat down slowly, picked up the pen, then put it right back down. Daniel came in a few minutes later, casual, calm, like nothing was strange about it. He said they had spoken to someone at the county office. He said this paperwork was just to simplify things, just in case something ever happened to me. He said it would protect the house, keep things in the family. All I needed to do was sign it. I didn't say a word. I just nodded once and slid the folder to the side. That afternoon, I took those papers and drove to the old town library, not to the county clerk, not to the bank, to the library. They had a copy machine in the back room, and no one ever asked questions. I made duplicates of every page and tucked them deep in the bottom of my purse. Then I drove home, parked like normal, and placed the original folder back on the kitchen table, right where it had been. For dinner, I made stew. The house smelled like bay leaf and garlic, the way Daniel used to love when he was a boy. He and his wife ate at the counter while watching something on their phones. Not once did he bring up the folder again. 2 days later, I went to the bank. I asked for a printout of all recent account activity. The clerk hesitated. She said there had been a new access authorization on file, a signed letter from me, allowing my son to view and manage joint assets. My hands went cold. I asked to see the signature. She printed it. My name was there, slanted right, loop in the wrong place, not mine. I looked her in the eye and told her I never signed anything like that. She looked uncomfortable, said she would make a note, that she could freeze external access until things were verified. I told her to do it immediately. I left with a knot in my chest and a copy of that signature in my purse. Back home, Daniel was out. His wife was folding laundry in the den. She smiled when I walked past her, a tight-lipped, polite smile. There was no warmth in it. That night, I opened the safe under my bed, the one Daniel didn't know about. Inside were my land deed, my will, and a few savings bonds I had kept over the years. Everything was still there, but I took them out and locked them in the trunk of my car, just in case. The next morning I called an attorney, a woman named Callie, who had helped a friend of mine draft an elder protection clause. We spoke for over an hour. I gave her copies of everything. She told me to sit tight, not to confront them yet, and to act normal until she could pull county property records. The waiting nearly broke me. I had raised this boy through storms, bills, accidents, and empty bank accounts, and now he was forging my name, pretending to do me a favor while quietly removing me from everything I had ever owned. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't threatened. That was the part that hurt the most. He did it all with silence, with steady, smiling patience, as if I wasn't even real anymore. But I was. I was still here, and I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Not until I knew exactly what they had done, and how far they were willing to go. The letter came from the county recorder's office. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address on the front. Inside was a single-page notice, stamped and dated, confirming a deed transfer request filed under my property. Filed 3 weeks ago, processed with an electronic notary, and already approved. I sat in my car, parked in the library lot, reading that letter over and over again. The name listed under grantee was Daniel's. My house, my land, the place I had lived for 47 years. Quietly reassigned. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just folded the letter, placed it in my purse next to the forged bank authorization, and called Callie. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was calm, low, but firm. She had already pulled the digital filing records. She confirmed what the letter said. The transfer had gone through. And the worst part wasn't just the forgery. It was how clean the paperwork looked. It had been planned, not rushed, not sloppy. There was even a notarized affidavit attached. Callie told me to keep everything exactly as it was, and not to mention anything to Daniel or his wife. She was already working on a legal response. I went home that night and did the same thing I'd been doing for weeks. I smiled. I stirred soup on the stove. I asked Daniel how work was going. He said things were good. He was thinking of putting in a garden in the spring, maybe a little patio, something for the family. Family. That word sat like a stone in my gut. That weekend, his wife threw a barbecue. They invited friends, neighbors I barely recognized. People smiled and laughed on the porch I built with my own hands. Someone asked Daniel how long he had lived in the house. He said it was his childhood home, and now it was his legacy. Said he was proud to raise his kids in the same place he was raised. Said it with his arm wrapped around his wife, like the whole thing had always belonged to them. I stood behind the screen door, out of sight, holding a dish of potato salad I hadn't made. That night, I opened the voice recorder on my phone. I began documenting everything: dates, times, conversations, every change I noticed in the house, every missing envelope, every phone call he stepped outside to take. I even recorded the silence between us, the strange pauses where something used to be. One morning, I walked into the guest room and found boxes stacked along the wall, plastic bins filled with decorations, toys, old photo albums. Daniel said they were just clearing space, organizing. He said the room was going to be repainted, maybe turned into an office. I didn't respond. I just walked out and closed my bedroom door. Later that day, I took my wedding ring off for the first time in 25 years and placed it inside the lining of my suitcase. Then I wrote a list. One column for everything I still legally owned, one for everything that had been taken, a third column for things I might lose next. By the time the sun went down, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit quietly and let them erase me from my own life. Not with fake signatures, not with garden parties, not with sweet voices hiding sharpened teeth. They wanted to act like I had already disappeared, like I was just some extra body taking up space in a house they thought they deserved. But I had one thing they didn't. I remembered everything, every document, every drawer, every detail, and I was going to use it all. The bank statement came in folded and creased, left inside the mailbox like it meant nothing. But I recognized the envelope. It was from my original credit union, the one I used back when Harold was alive. I hadn't received a statement from them in years. I thought the account had been closed. The moment I saw the name, I knew something wasn't right. I took it to the kitchen table, sat down slowly, and opened it with the same kind of care you use when handling something fragile. It was addressed to me, but the activity wasn't mine. 3 withdrawals, large ones, all within the last 5 months. One for a home improvement store, one for a contractor, one to a personal checking account that didn't belong to me. I reached for the file I had started keeping in the back of my closet. That file was growing thicker by the day. I slipped the new statement inside and clicked the folder shut. That evening, I went to the attic. The light bulb flickered twice before it stayed on. I climbed the stairs and moved past the boxes labeled with Harold's name, past the bins of holiday decorations, until I found the metal lockbox we used to keep under our bed. Inside were old loan papers, the original mortgage deed, the military discharge documents, and the folder labeled Retirement and Benefits. I pulled out the manila envelope marked Trust Documents, still sealed, still signed in blue ink. Inside were copies of our original wills and the amendment we made in 2004 after Harold's stroke. My name was listed as sole trustee. No one else had legal access without my consent. I took a photo of every page and sent them to Callie. No subject line, no explanation, just the documents. 2 hours later, she called. Her voice was sharper this time. She had already filed an emergency motion to freeze further property transfers tied to my name. She said we needed to act fast. If Daniel had accessed the old account, he might have used my social security number to authorize it. She asked me for the last time I physically visited the credit union. I told her I hadn't been there since before the pandemic. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. In my head, I pictured the old version of the house, the one where Harold still made coffee in the mornings and I still trimmed the hedges myself. The one where Daniel came home with grass stains on his jeans and asked for extra dinner rolls. That house was gone. What stood in its place was a performance, a stage, and I was the fading extra who didn't know she'd already been written out of the script. The next morning, I left early. I took the old Jeep instead of the newer sedan. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say where I was going. I drove downtown to the notary's office Callie recommended. I had to show 3 forms of ID just to sign my own affidavit. I swore under penalty of perjury that I had not granted anyone access to my estate, my deed, my accounts, or my retirement plan. By the time I walked back outside, the sky had darkened. Rain had started to fall, steady and cold. I didn't run to the car. I let it soak through my coat. I let it wash away whatever numbness I had left. The papers were filed. The timeline was locked. I wasn't just collecting evidence anymore. I was building a wall, one piece at a time. And soon, they were going to hit it. Hard. The following Tuesday, Callie called again. Her tone was clipped, urgent. She told me the judge had granted the freeze, but Daniel had already made moves before the order went through. A quitclaim deed had been filed 3 weeks prior, transferring the house to a shell company registered under a P.O. box in Phoenix. Callie traced it to a holding entity connected to one of Daniel's friends from college. The paperwork was sloppy, but just legal enough to delay a reversal. She sent me copies through secure email. I sat in front of the computer for 10 minutes before opening them. My name was still on the original deed, but below it was the transfer signature. It wasn't mine. The signature looked rushed, almost like someone had practiced it. But it wasn't mine. I got in the Jeep and drove straight to the county clerk's office. I asked to view the official copy of the deed on file. The woman behind the counter printed it without saying a word. I took it to the corner desk and pulled out a pen. I circled the signature, then I wrote one word in the margin: forged. I brought it to Callie's office that afternoon. She took one look and nodded. We had enough to open a formal fraud case, but she warned me it wouldn't be quick. Cases like these took months, sometimes longer. Back home, I stood in the front hallway for a long time. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No television, no echo of footsteps, no trace of Daniel or Maggie or their boys. It had only been 2 weeks since they left, but it felt like a lifetime. I walked through each room slowly, opening drawers, flipping switches. Half the closets were still filled with Maggie's things. Purses, boxes of shoes, vitamin supplements, a curling iron still plugged into the wall in the guest bathroom. It was like they left in a rush, or maybe they never thought they wouldn't be coming back. In the kitchen, the calendar on the fridge still showed July. A doctor's appointment was circled in red. Not mine. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to. That night, I pulled out the old metal recipe box. Inside were folded slips of paper from years ago. Grocery lists. Harold's notes for barbecue rub. My mother's chicken pot pie written in pencil. I took out one of Harold's notes. The paper was brittle. His handwriting was still strong. I sat at the table and stared at it until my eyes blurred. Then I put everything back, locked the box, and returned it to the cabinet above the stove. The next morning, I drove to a private investigator's office in the strip mall across from the train depot. His name was Roy Krieger, retired state trooper, wore a blazer 3 sizes too big, and called everyone ma'am. I liked him immediately. I handed him the file I had built. He flipped through it without a word. After 10 minutes, he looked up and said he'd take the job. He asked me what I wanted him to find. I told him I wanted proof, not just of the forgery. I wanted to know where the money went, the missing account activity, the fake signatures, and if Daniel had help. Roy nodded and wrote two things on a yellow legal pad. The first was Daniel's full name. The second was the word motive. He told me it always came down to motive. I told him I already knew it. He smiled and said it was still good to have on paper, just in case. Roy moved fast. By Friday, he had already pulled Daniel's financials from 3 different institutions and traced 2 wire transfers to accounts that weren't in Daniel's name. They were in the name of a consulting business registered to a woman in Tempe who had no online presence, no business license, and no actual office. Roy drove out there himself. The address was a vacant lot. He showed me photos he took from the curb. Empty space, chain-link fence, a broken sign half buried in dirt. This so-called consulting firm was just a funnel. Money in, nothing out. Callie looped in a forensic accountant. The man barely spoke and wore the same grey tie every day, but his hands moved like a magician over spreadsheets. He cross-checked the withdrawals from my savings account with the wire transfers Roy uncovered. The numbers matched almost exactly. 76,000, gone in 3 batches. All before the freeze went into effect. The accountant flagged one transaction from the week of Harold's memorial. It had been disguised as a recurring utility payment, but the routing number led to a bank in Nevada. The account was closed within 48 hours. I signed off on a formal complaint. Fraud, forgery, elder abuse, property theft. Callie submitted everything to the district court and requested expedited review. She said it wouldn't guarantee anything, but it would show the judge we weren't playing games. That same day, I returned to the pharmacy on Larchmont to refill a prescription. The clerk behind the counter gave me a strange look, then leaned in close. She said Daniel had come in last week trying to pick up my medication. He claimed I'd given him permission, said I was out of town and had asked him to get it. I stood there, stunned. She said she refused to release anything and flagged the account. I thanked her and walked out into the parking lot, feeling the air drain from my lungs. Back in the car, I stared at the glove compartment. Inside was a copy of Harold's will, the real one, the one Daniel claimed he never found. It was written 2 years before he passed. His signature was clean. The notary had stamped it in blue. There were clear lines about everything: the house, the accounts, the life insurance. It named me as sole beneficiary, no conditions, no amendments, nothing about Daniel. I had read it 100 times, but this time, the weight of it felt different. This wasn't just about money. It was about being erased. Roy called again that evening, said he pulled security footage from a UPS store near Route 9. Daniel had gone in 3 times that month, used a fake ID, picked up packages under the name McAllister. One of those packages was a notary seal kit. Roy said the seal was registered under a fake license. He had already turned the footage and documentation over to Callie. She was building the timeline. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked the hallway from the front door to the kitchen and back again until sunrise. Every creak in the floor felt sharper. They weren't coming back for the rest of their things. They thought it was theirs already. But I still had the deed. I still had the will. And now, I had the proof. The court date was set for the following Wednesday. Callie told me to stay calm, stay steady, and stay ready. She had filed for a temporary injunction to block any further financial activity from Daniel's end. The judge had granted it. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground settle under my feet. The night before the hearing, I slept at Roy's recommendation. He said the best revenge was walking into court well rested, with clear eyes and no fear. I followed his advice. I set out my clothes, packed my documents in a neat folder, and placed the original will at the very top. The courthouse was cold. The hallways buzzed with people, but I moved like I was underwater. When they called my name, I stepped forward without looking at Daniel. He was already seated with his lawyer, some man in a slick navy suit who barely looked old enough to rent a car. Callie laid everything out in sequence. She spoke slowly, clearly, without drama. Just facts. The forged power of attorney, the fake consulting firm, the closed Nevada account, the pharmacy report, the notary kit, the footage, the money trail. Then she handed the judge a copy of Harold's original will and paused. The courtroom was silent. Daniel's lawyer objected. He claimed it was a different version, said it had never been properly entered into probate. Callie calmly explained that it had been held back intentionally because Daniel had misrepresented its existence and submitted a forged document instead. She pulled out a certified statement from the notary who had signed the original. She had spoken to him herself. He confirmed the date, the signature, the blue seal. It was real, legally binding. The judge asked for a brief recess to review. I stepped into the hallway, gripping the arm of the bench outside. My hands were cold. Callie joined me and gave a single nod. No words. She didn't need to say anything. I understood. When we returned, the judge looked up. His voice was firm but calm. He acknowledged that the evidence supported immediate cause for further investigation into Daniel's actions. The freeze would stay in place. A formal inquiry would begin into the legitimacy of the documents Daniel had submitted. All access to my accounts would remain with me until the court ruled otherwise. Daniel's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Daniel kept his face blank, but I saw his jaw tighten. Callie leaned over and whispered that we had done enough for today. The next steps would be slow, but solid. Outside the courthouse, I breathed in deeply. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. But something had broken open. Not in a dramatic way. Not like in the stories. It was quieter. Like a door creaking open just enough to let air back in. And behind that door, I still had myself. Still standing. Still ready. 3 days after the hearing, I got a call from the bank manager. They had reviewed the flagged activity tied to the Nevada transfer and were now cooperating with the state's financial crimes unit. I didn't have to chase anymore. The system was finally turning its head toward the mess Daniel had made. Callie said it was rare, but in this case, the pattern was too deliberate to ignore. Every document, every click, every transfer bore his fingerprints. I spent that week preparing for the next phase, not just legally, emotionally. I went through the remaining boxes in my apartment. I found old birthday cards from Daniel, the ones with big glitter letters and promises he must have written without meaning them. I threw most of them away, not out of anger, just because they no longer held weight. Callie came by on Friday with updates. She had spoken directly with the forensic accountant. They confirmed that over the course of 16 months, Daniel had quietly moved just under $200,000 from the joint fund into a private LLC account. The name of the LLC was nothing special, just letters and numbers, a shell. But inside it, there were receipts, a new car, an investment in a short-term rental, fees paid to a luxury advisor for portfolio diversification. He had been using my retirement money to build his new life. I didn't cry. There was no part of me left that could be surprised. Only a deep, slow ache that kept widening every time I thought about how long it must have taken him to plan it all. How many lies stacked up to make it work. Callie said we had a strong case now, not just to restore what he took, but to open criminal charges if the state chose to pursue it. I asked what would happen next. She said the judge had approved a subpoena for Daniel's communication history, his emails, messages, even deleted ones. The digital trail was about to light up. That night, I walked to the pier near my apartment. I sat on a bench facing the water and let the cold wind bite at my cheeks. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't dreaming of punishments. I was just sitting with the truth, letting it settle into my bones without pushing it away. This wasn't about one court win or one frozen account. This was about reclaiming something slower, quieter, a kind of dignity that didn't need an audience. I didn't know what Daniel would do next, whether he'd fight, stall, lie, or try to twist things again. But it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't following him. I was walking my own path now, and step by step, I was starting to feel the ground again. 2 weeks later, I received a certified envelope from Callie's office. Inside was a transcript. 56 pages of emails and texts pulled from Daniel's company server and synced cloud accounts. The judge had moved fast. I didn't expect it to feel so clinical, so silent, just lines of text. But each one cut deeper than anything he had said to my face. One message to his wife read simply that once the funds cleared and I was out of the picture, they could finally breathe. Another thread was a conversation with a realtor in New Mexico about acquiring a second property using funds from what he called the old woman's cushion account. It was the same account I had built slowly, feeding in little deposits over 30 years. There was no trace of hesitation. Not one message where he questioned whether it was wrong, just task after task. A timeline of how to disappear me without ever laying a hand on me. Callie had tagged the most incriminating ones. She told me over the phone that the financial crimes investigator was already preparing a report for the DA's office. I asked her what it meant for Daniel. She said she couldn't promise anything yet. But if charges came, they would not be small. That night, I couldn't sleep. I made tea, walked around the apartment, opened the window even though it was freezing. Not out of anxiety, out of clarity, the kind that shakes you. I stood there thinking about how everything I had feared might happen had already happened, and somehow I was still standing. The next morning, I called McClary Assisted Living. It was the facility Daniel and his wife had looked into when they assumed I would quietly fade into a nursing wing. I scheduled a meeting with the director, not to move in, to make a donation, a very specific one. I asked for a scholarship fund to be created. Full coverage for women over 60 who had no surviving family or support system and could no longer afford care. I signed the paperwork. Transferred the first 50,000. I wanted something good to come out of all this. Not just legal closure, but something human. Something that would last beyond me. Later that week, I gave Callie permission to submit my formal affidavit to the press. I didn't want headlines, but I wanted documentation, public record, so no one could rewrite it later, so no one could say it didn't happen. And quietly, without fanfare, I changed my power of attorney. Not to another family member. I chose a public fiduciary, neutral, professional. I wasn't handing over my life again to someone who saw me as disposable. I didn't feel triumphant, but I did feel awake. That mattered more. Daniel called 2 months later. I didn't answer the first time. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was quiet, not the slick, polished tone I had heard in those transcripts. Just 5 words. I read everything. I am sorry. I didn't return the call right away. I needed to sit with it. Forgiveness, I had learned, wasn't a ribbon you handed out just because someone showed up asking for it. It was a decision, one that took work. We met in a small room at the courthouse, arranged through Callie. No cameras, no press, just the two of us and a court liaison in the hall in case things went sideways. Daniel looked different, smaller, like he had aged 10 years. His hands were trembling when he sat down. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't try to spin it. He said he had started therapy, that the investigation had cost him his position at the firm and most of his savings, that he had moved out of the house with his wife. He didn't call her by name. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, he asked if I wanted to say anything. I told him I had no interest in revenge, that what I wanted was truth, and he had finally given me that. Not in full, not cleanly, but enough to start. Then I told him something I had not planned to say, that the scholarship fund at Maclary had been started in my name, but I would be removing my name from it. Instead, it would be named after my mother, the woman who taught me strength didn't always come with noise. I said he would not be a part of that fund, but I hoped one day he would understand its purpose, that there is power in quiet repair. He nodded. He cried a little. I didn't. But I didn't feel cold either. I felt something looser in my chest. Lighter. When I stood to leave, I said one last thing. I told him I wasn't going to press additional charges beyond what the state had already filed. The consequences were already in motion. I didn't need more. I just needed peace. And I had it now. I walked out of that courthouse without shaking, not triumphant, not vindicated, but clear. The kind of clarity that comes from having faced everything and still standing. I went back to my apartment, lit a candle. Not for ceremony, just because it was a quiet evening, the kind I used to think I would never have again. I made tea, opened the window even though the air was cool, and I sat in that space, no longer waiting for someone to tell me who I was. I already knew. If you're still here, thank you for listening. If this story reminded you of anything in your own life, feel free to share in the comments. Your voice matters. Every story told is a weight lifted, and every truth spoken gives someone else permission to stand up too.